Welcome back to the No Morning Show, Trinidad and Tobago. I am Natalie Legore, and of course, Rockus and Carrie are here with me and the rest of the crew. Sometimes I wish you could see them behind the scenes laughing after we ending, but that's all right. We do have on Zoom with us this morning the Tobago PNM Council leader, Tracy Davidson Celestine, and of course, we're continuing the conversation about the 6-6 gridlock, deadlock, stopgap, no movement that's happened with the election results on January 25th. Since the 28th, the assemblymen have been sworn in, but absolutely nothing has been able to take place since then in terms of getting them to function within the assembly. Good morning to you, Mrs. Celestine.
Good morning to you, Natalie, and good morning to all of Trinidad and Tobago.
Thank you so much for being with us here. So I know that the PDP and the PNM are supposed to have a meeting tomorrow. Do you believe this meeting will be that place where you all decide and agree on the way forward?
Well, what I know that is that there would be a meeting, but I cannot yet predict the outcome of the meeting because things over the last year or so have been so unpredictable, but there will be a meeting tomorrow.
Why didn't you, the People's National Movement Tobago Council, accept the proposal from the PDP?
Well, we have not gone into negotiations yet, Natalie. As you rightfully indicated this morning, those negotiations will take place tomorrow. But our position has been well articulated in that we are following the rule of law as it relates to the Tobago House of Assemblies Act. And once as we have agreement on that and the very basic principles of governance, everything else should fall into place.
Let's talk about, you know, one of the things that the PDP is asking for. It says the PNM can have the chief secretary and the presiding officer, but it must have the secretary of finance. It must have the secretary of health, and I think the other one is infrastructure. What does the People's National Movement Tobago Council make of these demands that there are specific requests towards these divisions? Sorry.
Well, we have not even gone there to talk about the specifics. What we have set out would be the very basic framework, or let me not say basic, the fundamental principles on which we are to enter into this arrangement. Once as there is agreement on that, then at the negotiation table, we will decide who, what, where, when, and how. And so this is where we are at. So whenever that meeting is held, whether it be tomorrow or otherwise, because as I said, things are so unpredictable, then we will go into the specifics as to how this thing will be operationalized.
As it is with the 6-6, is it that only 3 people will make up the Executive Council?
No, the Executive Council comprises of 9 persons, or positions rather. You have the Chief Secretary, Deputy Chief Secretary, and not more than 7 other secretaries. So there are 9 positions in the Executive Council of the Tobago House of Assembly.
Are you willing, with the distribution of those Executive Council members, are you willing to give the PDP 5 then, of the 9?
Well, we have not gone to 5. I think our proposal would have put forward 4 positions of secretary in the Executive Council. And as I said, those have to be fleshed out whenever we meet.
So is it that at this point you're saying, since the proposal was given last week, or probably it was the week before, that the People's National Movement haven't decided on anything whatsoever outside of saying, okay, you know, you can't have X amount of secretaries?
Well, the proposal was submitted, I think it was a Thursday night, to be exact. Today is Tuesday, so that's about a difference of about 4 or 5 days, if I count correctly. And as I said, our position is the basic framework. Yes, we can agree to certain tenets, specifics. When we are at the negotiation table, we will hammer those out.
All right. Tell us what's the basic framework that the People's National Movement has agreed to thus far?
Well, following on the Tobago House of Assemblies Act, following the basic tenets of good governance, we want to ensure that there is collective responsibilities. And we spoke to, we are willing to discuss the Chief Secretary position, the presiding officer position, and then we will discuss how we will build out the Executive Council going forward.
I know that the PNM's position, the PNM Tobago Council position, is that it wants to go back to the polls. Is this just a stalling tactic, Mrs. Celestine, to say, okay, the PDP has put something in front of us. We can't say we're not going with it because the Tobago population is looking for governance. Is this just a stalling tactic, hoping that you'll go back to the polls instead of having this power-sharing arrangement?
Well, I can't say, Natalie, because as I told you, the proposal from the PDP was only received, the counter proposal was only received on Thursday night. Of course, you would know if you were following what has been happening in Tobago, there was no such proposal put forward by the PDP before. As a matter of fact, we were very clear from the start when we saw what was happening. And our proposal we advanced very early, and that is we believed that the most democratic way to solve this situation is to go back to the polls, because it really never appeared to us that there would have been any of the parties coming to the table to discuss any sort of resolution, whether it be for the long term or whether it be for the short term. So we have been very consistent. The only difference is that we have said, let us put aside our short-term objective for the longer-term objective, which is all parties working towards advancing and advocating for the Tobago House of Assembly Amendment Bill to be brought to the Parliament and to be approved. So we have put forward our proposal. I don't see this as a stalling tactic. It is something that has to be well thought out. It is something that has to be based on some very fundamental tenets, and this is where we are at this point. I can't say that on the part of the PNM that this is a stalling tactic.
So how long would this kind of arrangement be in place, though, if you all are able to hammer out something and agree on the way forward for the THA?
Well, it's the short term that we are trying to resolve, and the short term being up to hopefully September or before the end of the year, because we have the assurance, or the commitment rather, that the Tobago House of Assembly bill will be brought to the Parliament this year. So we expect that by September, those discussions would be concluded, that the bill would be proclaimed in Parliament, and that would be the trigger for the next Tobago House of Assembly election. So what we're really looking at is a short-term kind of arrangement that will cause good governance, of course, and civility to continue in the Tobago political landscape.
Right, but I come back to this, the Secretary of Finance, the Division of Finance that the PDP wants. Is that a concern for the PNM, or, you know, do you interpret this as what we saw on the campaign trail where the PDP accused you of being tricky Tracy and this whole idea behind the zip line and monies not being accounted for according to the PDP? Do you believe that's why they're asking for the Secretary of Finance, so that they can oversee how monies in the THA are being spent?
Well, I don't know of the motivations of the PDP, and I really cannot speak to that. But what we know is that in the Tobago House of Assembly and from the PNM administration, we have been managing the affairs of the Tobago House of Assembly very well, and we have been very accountable to the people. And we have always given our pledge and our commitment that we will work with the administrators, we will work with the member of staff to ensure that we have the systems in place that will foster good governance and accountability on the island. So I cannot say what is the motivation of the PDP at this time in terms of wanting, well, communicating to the public that such a position is non-negotiable.
All right, but how does the party feel about that? The fact that they're entering the table already with something that is unmovable or unshakable. How does the party feel about that?
Well, what we have said is that if we are to base this arrangement on the principles of good governance and giving the Chief Secretary the kind of authority, then you would know that the position of Secretary of Finance, or even perhaps the Ministry of Finance in any organization, is basically the advisor to, if you're looking at it from the central government perspective, the advisor to the Prime Minister. And of course, in the Tobago House of Assembly, the position of Secretary of Finance is really the advisor to the Chief Secretary, because you really cannot manage an administration without knowing what is going on in the organization. And so for us, we must be in a position to be advised in a manner that will cause the Tobago House of Assembly to deliver on behalf of its people and in order for us to have effective governance.
So considering that the PDP is saying, listen, this is non-negotiable, but it is saying that the Chief Secretary can go to somebody of the PNM's pick, how is that going to work? Are we going to be good with the advisor, a PDP advisor to a PNM Chief Secretary?
Well, and that is the point. That is the point I'm making, Natalie. In terms of those specifics, those would have to be hammered out around the table because, of course, if you're talking about advising someone, you have to know that the person has the capacity and the capability and can manage the thing in a way that could provide you with the information to make meaningful decisions on behalf of the people that you lead.
Right. But let me just be frank with you. Do you believe that it's a good working order, that this is something that could actually work if it turns out that way?
No, Natalie, it's not something that can work. And as I said, we will flesh out all of the specifics around the table.
So you finally gave me an answer. You don't believe that it can work. Well, I don't know as well. I wait to see what's going to be happening. But tell me something, Mr. Celestine. Has the PNM Tobago Council gone back to the people to speak to them, though, to find out what its base requires at this time, what it wants to see happening?
Well, we had several meetings, one with the Executive Council where we discussed the matter. We also had a meeting at the level of the executive arm of the PNM and also at the level of the Tobago Council of the PNM. We discussed the advantages, the disadvantages. There are real fears, there are real concerns from the members of the party because, of course, this is something new, very unprecedented in the context of Tobago's politics. And we have concerns with how the PDP would have carried about their campaign because, of course, you know, it is always said how you campaign is how you will govern. And so those are real fears for all of us, including me as the political leader of the party. And we really have questions in terms of whether this arrangement can work, whether there would be, you know, quite a lot of issues and chaos going forward. But at the end of the day, we have matured as an organization. We have said that, you know, regardless of the implications, we are focusing on the bigger picture, which is to ensure that Tobago has good governance, and we're willing to look at an arrangement that can redound to the benefit of the people of Tobago.
If the PNM and the PDP can't even get together and agree on the short-term action that is, you know, governance of the TH and the people of Tobago, will you all even be able to agree on autonomy for Tobago? Because somehow I'm remembering that I heard Watson Duke, as leader of the PDP, talking about cessation from Trinidad. And I don't remember that the autonomy bill even spoke of that. So are we even going to be able to agree on what Tobago needs to go to Central, to go to the Parliament to say, okay, this is what we want passed?
Well, that position has already been taken by the wider majority of the people of Tobago. If you would recall, there were quite a lot of consultations over the last probably 5 to 8 years, thereabout, when the People's National Movement administration led consultations throughout Tobago. So the positions have really been accounted for, and the position paper, which is the bill, is now at the level of the Joint Select Committee in Parliament. So when Watson spoke about the cessation of Tobago, I suspect that that was the PDP's position at that point in time. But as it is now, the people of Tobago have spoken. They have said this is what we want: further autonomy, further self-determination. We want to be able to stand side by side with Trinidad. We want more resources so that we're in a position to be developed in Tobago. We want control of some of the respective areas that are not included in the 5th schedule. And of course, the issue of the boundaries for Tobago, amongst other important things, have already been spoken on and agreed on at the level of Tobago. And as I said, the document is now at the Joint Select Committee, hopefully to be brought forward by May or June of this year.
So when this meeting happens tomorrow, when can the population hear from the two camps, at least from your camp, about the way forward?
Well, I would suspect at the end of the meeting, we will both have our positions, whether agreed on or own individual positions, and we will communicate to the public in terms of what our positions are, our respective positions are.
I somehow I'm still grappling with it that, you know, we do have kind of an interim arrangement in place because the Constitution does not allow, you know, for the THA to be ungoverned. Is this really, is the PNM Tobago Council really trying to get a resolution to this, considering that, I mean, 6 or half a dozen of the other, the PNM Tobago Council is already in the THA?
Yes, well, you're right. The law is on our side where governance is concerned when the House stands dissolved and the secretaries are there doing what they have to do. Some of us have doubled up in terms of the respective divisions, but we are there. We are committed to responding to the needs of Tobagonians. However, we've had an election and we have to recognize that we have had an election, and so it calls for us to come up with some sort of resolution until we can deal with the long term. And as I said, we are very committed to finding a resolution to the current impasse that we face. And so we go into that meeting with good faith and with the understanding that we want to see this resolved. But if it does not get to that point, then of course there are fallback positions. One, we continue as we are doing now, and we wait for the passage of the bill and let that be the one to trigger the next election. But there are several options on the table at this time.
I am curious, Mr. Celestine, has the PNM Tobago Council met to speak about what's indeed being charged, and if there's anything within the THA, not only being charged but being convicted of a crime, if there's anything within the THA that would prevent him from being a part of the THA as he has been charged with a crime, well, convicted of a crime?
Well, the law in itself would deal with that. I am not so sure in terms of the specifics having to do with any conviction. It is something that I can research and get back to you on at a later time. But I'm sure if there is anything written in the Tobago House of Assembly Act, rather, that it can be dealt with in a particular way.
But it's something that the PNM Tobago Council is looking at?
Well, we have not given it any specific attention for now, but I am sure it is something that is being discussed in the public domain at this time. And, you know, Mr. Duke is a public officer, so I expect that he would respond accordingly.
All right, Mr. Celestine, thank you so very much. And keep us up to date, you know, see what's coming out of that meeting tomorrow.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. Tracy Davidson Celestine, political leader of the Tobago PNM Council, speaking to us there. And she does not believe that the power sharing arrangement, at least where the secretary is that it belongs to the PNM and the finance officer or the finance secretary belongs to the PDP. She doesn't believe that's a working order, but we wait to see what's going to happen when they iron out the details of that power sharing arrangement tomorrow. We take a break and we'll be back with you.